In the vast stretch of space, where silver nebulae flickered like ghostly veins across the dark, the galactic Concord had long believed they had unraveled the mysteries of every intelligent species ever born and buried. But Earth, a forgotten blue marble on the edge of Sector Delta, was the latest puzzle they uncovered after a deep space survey drone pinged anomalous energy readings from what should have been a dead world, led by scholarkin Jorath, a tall, pale-eyed Thesari known for his arrogance and appetite for lost civilizations. The research fleet descended through Earth's fractured atmosphere, combing through rusted cities overgrown with moss and silence, finally reaching a half-buried structure once known as the Library of Human Cultural Archives, what remained of Earth's digital legacy, locked beneath thick layers of ash and time. Their automated translators worked tirelessly, converting strange texts into galactic standard, but what they found confused more than enlightened them. Vaults weren't filled with technologies or histories of war as expected, but with strange tales of men who flew without wings, beasts born from shadows, swords pulled from stone, and gods who walked among humans as easily as neighbors. There were stories of mighty titans locked in battles across mountains, creatures that fed on fear, and even darker whispers of things that twisted minds and fed on dreams, all categorized in a section labeled myths and legends. And the aliens laughed not out of malice, but out of disbelief, for no intelligent species they had encountered in 1,000 systems had wasted so much energy on what seemed to be fantasy. Jorath, for a flickering holodisplay that showed a snarling creature labeled Fenrir, waved his hand dismissively and declared to his team that these were mere cultural hallucinations, tales to explain storms and disease before the humans learned science. And with a tone soaked in mockery, he labeled the entire collection under cultural delusions human, even broadcasting a public message to the wider Concord that Earth had offered entertainment, not enlightenment, causing ripples of laughter across academic circles throughout the stars. But far away, on the lonely rim of space near Station Vanex 3, a dull, spinning research outpost tasked with scanning for rogue signals and dark matter spikes. Silent alarm pierced the quiet routine of an otherwise uneventful cycle when a small escape pod, human in design but heavily scarred, emerged from the warp fold, tumbling erratically before smashing into the docking bay, shields failing, hull screaming as it came to rest, battered and burning, with no clear sign of who sent it or why. It had arrived after humanity was assumed extinct for over 100 years. The station's crew, mostly automated units with 2 bored alien overseers, scrambled to secure the breach, unsure whether it carried weapons or viruses. But what they found inside froze them where they stood. It was a woman. Human, her face thin and pale from long isolation, wrapped in a torn flight suit bearing an ancient Earth insignia, barely readable under layers of dust and soot. And though her body was trembling, bruised, and clearly dehydrated, she was alive. She looked up with bloodshot eyes. Her lips cracked and tried to speak, but the words barely came out, so they rushed her to containment, alerting the Concord immediately. And when scholarkin Jorath himself heard the news, he rerouted his vessel to Vanex 3, curious and impatient, wanting to confirm for himself whether this survivor was some long-lost remnant or simply a ghost caught in the wrong century. When he arrived, the woman had already been stabilized, and she sat upright in a reinforced chamber, her eyes sharper now, more aware, but still haunted, as if she had seen something too vast and too terrible to forget. And when Jorath entered, flanked by armed security drones, he demanded her name and purpose, to which she replied slowly and with great effort, "Commander Alora Griggs." Outpost Thorn classified project, and then paused as if debating whether to continue. Jorath scoffed, suggesting she had been damaged by cryosleep or madness, until she locked eyes with him, calm, cold, and certain, and whispered, barely audible over the humming lights, "They're real," 2 words that sent a strange chill crawling down the spines of every alien in the room. For though her voice was soft, it carried the weight of something deep and dark and dangerous. Confused, Jorath asked her what she meant, but Elara only repeated, "The legends, the myths you laughed at. We didn't make them up," before her strength gave out and she collapsed, forcing medical bots to rush in and sedate her once more. But the damage was done. Those 2 words spread through the Concord like wildfire, unsettling scholars, unnerving explorers, and awakening an ancient fear long buried under layers of smug superiority. That night, while Jorath reviewed the digital logs again, this time paying closer attention to the old mythological files, a new signal appeared on the long-range scanners of Vanex 3. Low frequency and wrapped in human encryption protocols no one had used for a century, broadcasting from Saturn's moon, Titan A. Place long abandoned, assumed inert, but now alive with something. The code translated into a simple looped message: Project Mimes's containment breach help. The coordinates aligned with what old Earth maps labeled as Outpost Thorn, and though many argued it was likely a system error or relic transmission, Jorath hesitated for the first time in years, staring at Elara's unconscious form and the flickering image of a massive wolf-like creature once believed to be fantasy. And somewhere deep in his mind, a quiet thought grew louder with every passing second. What if the humans didn't imagine their monsters? What if they simply survived them? Elara Griggs woke slowly in a small, sterile room surrounded by soft humming machines and blinking lights that made her head throb. But even in her weakened state, her mind was sharp, haunted by memories that refused to fade. She knew time was short, and the secrets she carried were dangerous, far beyond anything the Galactic Concord expected when they found Earth's so-called myths. Because those stories were not just legends told to children, they were warnings, desperate messages from a lost humanity trying to keep the darkness sealed away. And as the medical droids tended to her wounds, Elora's voice broke through the silence with trembling strength, telling the gathered scientists and soldiers about a hidden place beneath Titan's frozen surface, a deep underground facility where Project Mimesis had been carried out, an experiment to trap creatures born from human fears and nightmares, captured in cold sleep to keep them from destroying what little was left of humanity. And despite the disbelief that greeted her words, her eyes burned with a truth that could not be ignored. She described corridors lined with metal and ice, chambers where unknown horrors rested, creatures so terrifying they defied reason, including one named Fenrir, a beast so large and cunning it could bring entire fleets to ruin if unleashed. And as she spoke, the xenobiologists exchanged uneasy glances, their scientific minds struggling to separate fact from fiction, because the existence of such beings challenged everything the Concord believed about life and myth. And when Jorath finally spoke, his tone a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. He asked for proof, for anything tangible that could verify her claims. But Elara's answer was a quiet plea to return to Titan with a team strong enough to face the unknown, to reopen the old base and confirm the horrors she had survived, because the distress beacons still sent signals, a dying call for help that she could not ignore. Days passed as the Concord debated, torn between ridicule and fear, but finally, under pressure and with Jorath reluctantly leading, they launched an expedition to Titan. a moon long abandoned and considered safe. Yet Alara's warnings echoed in their minds, casting a shadow of doubt over every step as the ship descended through them. Thick, orange clouds toward the icy surface, revealing a landscape both beautiful and desolate, where massive cracks in the ice hinted at something hidden below, and upon landing near the coordinates marked Outpost Thorn, the team found silence, no movement, no response to their calls, only the cold wind that seemed to carry whispers of forgotten struggles. Inside the base, the air was stale, machines silent, and signs of a hurried evacuation evident in scattered papers and broken equipment. But the deeper they ventured, the more chilling it became, as shadows seemed to linger in corners and strange markings, etched into walls, hinted at rituals or warnings that humans once believed would keep the darkness at bay. And when they reached the central chamber, the team discovered sealed cryotubes labeled with cryptic designations containing creatures that matched the myths. A massive serpentine form called J. Armungander, coiled in ice, a horned figure named Baphomet frozen in a trance, and a humanoid beast marked Wendigo Type 3, all suspended in a fragile state between life and death. Then the unexpected happened. One cryotube cracked, a low hiss escaping as frost gave way to dark liquid, and the team's unease turned to panic when a faint, rasping breath echoed through the halls, suggesting that these creatures were not simply relics, but still alive, waiting, watching as alarms blared and emergency lights flickered. The team scrambled to contain the threat, but it was clear they were unprepared for the ancient predators that had once stalked Earth's shadows. And as the Wendigo's tube shattered fully, releasing the skeletal, feral beast into the cold air, the soldiers' weapons barely slowed its swift, lethal movements, forcing Alara to make a desperate choice using knowledge from her past. She triggered an old security protocol unique to humans, sealing the chamber and forcing everyone into close quarters with the nightmare they had unleashed. And in that tight space, Alora spoke of humanity's past battles with these creatures, explaining that every legend was a story of survival, a record of how humans had fought the darkness with fire, steel, and unbreakable will. Her words kindled a new understanding in Jorah and the others, as fear mixed with respect for a species they had underestimated. But the Wendigo's presence was a reminder that the fight was far from over, and as it prowled the shadows, searching for prey, the team braced themselves for the harsh truth. Humanity's legends were not just old stories, they were battles fought in blood and bone, and the survivors were still out there, waiting for the galaxy to stop laughing and start fearing the truth, all while the distress beacon continued to pulse. Heartbeat. From the past warning the present, and the cold moon of Titan became the stage for a confrontation that would decide whether the ancient darkness could be kept locked away, or if it would finally be unleashed upon a universe unprepared for what it truly meant to fear the legends. The Concord expedition landed on Titan under a heavy orange sky, its thick clouds swirling like a warning from a forgotten past as the massive ship's engines kicked up frost and dust. And from the moment Alora Griggs stepped onto the icy surface, the air seemed heavier, charged with an invisible tension that tightened around the team like a noose. The base known as Outpost Thorn lay partially buried beneath layers of frozen rock and cracked ice, and its once proud architecture now looked like a skeleton clinging to survival, its rusted gates and broken turrets whispering stories of failure and silence. But Alara's gaze was sharp, scanning every shadow and echo with the knowledge of what still lurked beneath. Accompanied by armed security drones and skeptical scientists, Jorth led the cautious approach, aware that this was no ordinary archaeological mission, but a step into human nightmares made real. and as they crossed the threshold into the base, the temperature dropped sharply, breath freezing mid-air and electronic devices flickering as if warning them to turn back. The corridors stretched deep and winding, filled with the stench of decay and the remnants of hurried evacuations scattered to pads, empty food containers, and scorch marks where desperate fights had taken place, but no bodies, no survivors. The only sound was the distant hum of dying machinery and the faint crackle of the distress beacon still sending its urgent signal, which guided them deeper into the labyrinth at times. Strange symbols caught their eyes, etched runes and signs not recognized by any Concord linguist, which Alara explained were warnings in ancient human dialects meant to seal off horrors that should never be released. And as they pressed forward, they discovered rooms filled with scientific equipment designed to contain the uncontainable, with thick glass observation panels showing chambers where massive creatures slumbered, frozen in suspended animation, and each bore a name from Earth's oldest myths, Jaramungander, Baphomet, and Wendigo, their forms both beautiful and terrifying, proving that human imagination was not fiction but memory. The team reached the central vault where Project Mimesis was housed, a place sealed by multi-layered security protocols, accessible only to those with the right codes that Alara remembered from her time before the collapse. And as the gates slid open with a groan, the air seemed to shift, colder and more charged, like the breath of something waiting to be freed. Inside the chamber, cryobes stood in rows, their surfaces frosted over, but one tube marked Fenrir class was cracked and leaking. Dark, viscous fluid, a sign that the containment was weakening. And just as the team tried to stabilize the system, a sudden explosion of sound shattered the eerie silence. The Wendigo's cryotube fractured fully, releasing a skeletal, hulking figure that moved with unnatural speed and a hunger that made the air itself seem to recoil. Panic erupted as soldiers fired energy weapons, but the creature dodged with terrifying agility, tearing apart drones and scattering the team, forcing them to retreat deeper into the base's bowels, while Alara stood her ground, using an old emergency override only humans knew, sealing the main chamber to trap the beast inside. With no escape and tension at its peak, the team gathered in a small control room, the flickering lights casting long shadows as Alara recounted the true story behind the myths, how ancient humans had battled these beings for centuries, using fire, traps, and their will to survive, and how those stories had been passed down as warnings to keep the darkness at bay. But now the seals were breaking, and the darkness was stirring again. Jorath, once a skeptic, now felt the cold grip of fear as he realized their arrogance had almost doomed them, and the scientists scrambled to regain control of the base's systems, searching for ways to recontain or destroy the creatures without risking the entire moon. As night fell over Titan's frozen landscape outside, the echoes of growls and distant crashes haunted the corridors, and every creak and shadow threatened to hide another horror waiting to strike, forcing the team into a desperate race against time to secure the facility before the legends could escape into the galaxy. Alara, standing at the heart of the control room, knew this was only the beginning, that the ancient battles between humanity and its nightmares were far from over, and that if they failed here, the horrors of Earth's myths would become the nightmares of every star system in the universe. As the chilling air of Titan's underground base grew heavier with dread, the team's nerves stretched thin, each step echoing through the cold halls that once housed secrets now violently awakened. And when the cryotube containing the Wendigo shattered, releasing the skeletal creature into the shadows, chaos exploded. The beast moved with a terrifying speed and ferocity, tearing apart the armed drones with ease, enforcing the scientists and soldiers to scatter in all directions. The low growls and clicking bones ringing in their ears as the monster hunted through the dark like a ghost of old Earth's nightmares come to life. Amidst the panic, Alara remained steady, her face hardened by years of survival, knowing that fighting such creatures with modern weapons was futile, and that only through ancient knowledge and desperate courage could they hope to survive. So she triggered the base's emergency lockdown, sealing all exit points and locking the team into the main control chamber where blinking consoles offered little comfort, and as the doors slammed shut, the cold steel walls seemed to close in like the jaws of a trap, with limited options and time running out. Alara explained to Jorath and the others that the creatures in the cryotubes were not just monsters, but survivors of humanity's darkest battles, beings that had shaped legends and inspired fear to keep others away, and that those stories were coded survival manuals passed down through generations to warn of the dangers still lurking beneath the surface. She spoke of the Fenrir, a wolf-like entity so intelligent and brutal it had nearly destroyed entire human enclaves. The J. Armungandr, a serpent said to encircle worlds in its endless coil, and baffled shadow creature that fed on despair and darkness, all locked away because they were too dangerous to be free. But now, with the cracks in containment, the legends were waking, and the team was trapped with the walking nightmares. As the Wendigo prowled just beyond the heavy blast doors, its cold, hungry breath brushing against the metal, tension turned to fear when security cameras caught glimpses of the other creatures beginning to stir in their frozen prisons, their slow movements promising that the battle was far from over. The soldiers tried to organize patrols, but every corridor held shadows deeper than the last, and strange noises echoed a mixture of growls, distant screams, and unearthly whispers that made even the bravest hesitate. Jorath, his pride wounded by his earlier disbelief, now felt a growing respect for Alara, who seemed to carry the weight of countless battles in her eyes. And as she explained how humans had once used fire, traps, and cunning to hold the darkness at bay, the team realized that only by embracing those old tactics and refusing to succumb to panic could they hope to survive this siege. With power flickering and life support systems faltering, they devised a desperate plan to use them base's ancient containment fields to refreeze the creatures, but it required manual override deep within the heart of the lab, meaning someone would have to face the monsters alone in their own lair. Volunteers hesitated until Alara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, insisting that she was the only one who knew the layout and the risks. And as she prepared to descend into the cold abyss, the others barricaded the control room and loaded their weapons with renewed determination. Weight of survival heavy on their shoulders. Every step Alara took into the darkness was a step into the stories she had lived, memories of lost friends, battles fought in silence, and the harsh truth that legends were born from pain and courage. And as she reached the stasis chamber, the flickering lights revealed frozen monsters, slowly awakening, their eyes cracking open with hunger and hate. Yet Alara moved swiftly, activating the containment fields with trembling hands while feeling the heat of their gaze upon her. And just as the powerful energy began to freeze the creatures solid once more, the Wendigo burst through a weakened wall, claws slashing through metal and flesh, forcing her to fight with only a plasma torch, the heat searing through the beast's icy veins and making it recoil in a scream that shook the very ground. In that battle, Alara showed the raw will of humanity, the refusal to be consumed by fear, the strength to face the darkness head-on. And as the cryotubes hissed and sealed, the legends slowly returned to their prisons, but not without cost. as the base trembled, warning that this fragile peace might not last when she finally reunited with the team. Bruised and exhausted, but alive, Jorath looked at her with newfound respect, understanding that the stories he once mocked were not just fiction, but the scars of survival. And as they prepared to leave the base behind, the last echoes of growls faded into silence, leaving a chilling reminder that the legends still walked in the shadows, waiting for the next time they would rise, and with the Concord receiving the final transmissions. From Titan, a message was clear. Humanity's myths were not simply tales to entertain, they were warnings of an ancient war that was far from over, and the galaxy would have to decide whether to join the fight or be consumed by the darkness the humans had once contained. The bitter cold of Titan's underground base clung to every breath as Alara and the remaining crew prepared for the final showdown. The echoes of the imprisoned legends growing faint but never fully gone, because deep beneath the ice, the creature's ancient rage simmered like a storm waiting to break. And the knowledge that these beings had survived millennia in cold prisons made the fear in the hearts of the team burn hotter than the plasma torches they carried, while above, the Concord fleet orbited silently, unaware that their fate was tied to the courage of a few. Alara stood at the edge of the command room, her eyes scanning the flickering monitors that still showed the faintest flickers of movement in the cryotubes, signs that the seals were weakening, and she knew that if the creatures fully awoke, the legends of Earth would no longer be stories, but unstoppable realities consuming worlds across the stars. And with that chilling thought, she steeled herself to face what might be the last battle humanity had to fight, as the power supply weakened, forcing the base into emergency mode. The team was forced to improvise, rigging ancient human technology with modern energy cells, creating a makeshift barrier of fire and light to keep the darkness at bay, and Alara led the effort, her voice calm but commanding, urging them to remember that fire was not just a weapon, but a symbol of human will and defiance against the consuming void outside the sealed chambers. Strange sounds grew louder, echoes of claws scraping metal, growls deep and guttural, whispers that seemed to crawl through the walls, and the very ground trembled as the legends stood in their frozen prisons, testing their bonds with a fury that made the air thick with tension. In a desperate gamble, Alara decided to use an old human ritual she had learned in secret, a combination of fire, light, and sound, meant to confuse and weaken the creature's primal instincts. A reminder that humanity's oldest tools were not just survival mechanisms, but keys to controlling the darkness. And as the team gathered around a roaring fire pit rigged from emergency supplies, their faces illuminated by dancing flames, the atmosphere changed, no longer just fear, but a fierce hope that burned brighter than the cold that sought to swallow them. Suddenly, the base shook violently as the Fenrir's cryotube shattered, releasing a massive, wolf-like beast with glowing eyes filled with malice and hunger. And as it charged the flames, the fire blazed with a sudden intensity, driving the creature back with snarls of confusion and pain, proving Alara's belief that darkness feared the fire of light and spirit. But the battle was far from over. The team fought with every ounce of strength, using flamethrowers, plasma cutters, and makeshift incendiaries to keep the legends from escaping their prison. But the creatures adapted quickly, showing intelligence and cunning that rivaled the humans, forcing Alara to push past exhaustion and fear. Her every move a dance between hope and desperation. And as the battle raged on, old stories she had heard as a child came alive, heroes wielding fire against dragons, warriors lighting torches to chase away shadows, and she realized that humanity's true power was not in their technology, but in their spirit, an unyielding flame that no darkness could ever fully snuff out. As dawn approached on Titan's frozen surface, the flickering lights of the base began to stabilize. The last of the creatures was sealed once again in reinforced cryotubes, and the fire that had once seemed fragile now roared as a symbol of victory. But not without sacrifice. Many were lost, and scars would remain, both physical and in memory, reminding the survivors that peace was fragile, and the legends were never truly gone, only waiting for the moment darkness grew bold again. Jorath, standing beside Alara, looked at the rising sun cutting through Titan's orange haze, and nodded in respect, understanding. Finally, that humanity was more than the sum of its technology or strength. It was the fire in their hearts, the legends they carried in their souls, and the fierce refusal to be forgotten or defeated. As the survivors prepared to leave the Forbidden Moon, a final transmission was sent to the Concord fleet, a warning and a promise that when darkness fears the fire, humanity will rise, fierce and unbroken, ready to face any shadow that dares to cross the stars, and far above Titan, the galaxy listened, the laughter silenced at last by the whispered truth of legends made real, and the fire of humanity blazing brighter than ever before.